Hey, welcome back to another dispatch from Holly McKay. Today we're going to be talking about fentanyl and cartels and death. Holly, tell us what's going on.
So I've written a lot about cartels. So you can go back through the Substack and see some different articles there, and really just their influence in bringing fentanyl into the United States, which is such a huge, huge killer. I mean, we're talking about more than 100,000 people each year in the US dying from fentanyl poisoning. So it is a big, big problem that is very, very hard to grasp. But when I write about this, what's really interesting is people always say to me the question of, well, isn't it bad for business that cartels are killing their clientele essentially? So what happens is whether it's sort of fake pharmaceutical drugs or street drugs like heroin or ecstasy or anything really that the cartels produce, oftentimes now they're being laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl, the precursors for that come from China. And then what the cartels do is they have labs and they sort of mix it up and put varying different amounts into these pills, and it's sort of a really cheap filler, but it's extremely deadly. I mean, depending on the person, the tiniest, a few grains of it essentially can kill you. So it is very serious, but obviously that's sort of not deterring the cartels from using a fentanyl in their drugs, and it's not actually that bad for their business because the risk I get or the reward really outweighs the risk. And that is comes down to the fact that fentanyl is just so cheap. You're looking at, whereas sort of a 10-pound package of these drugs, they might start in Mexico and they're $15,000. And then by the time they get really deep into the US, that same value has gone up to $100,000. And they can make a lot more profit from that by using fentanyl because it is so much cheaper than heroin. For example, you might be looking at paying $60 for 100, grams of heroin, whereas that same amount may cost you $3 or $4 if it's fentanyl. So using fentanyl as a filler is really creating massive profits for the cartels. And the fact that 100,000 or so people die of it each year really isn't harming their bottom line. And when you suffer from an addiction, you're going to find whatever fill that you can to fulfill that need. And therefore, there are many people that are still willing to take that risk, despite the knowledge that there is really a high chance that the drug that they're taking has fentanyl in it, which is very, very deadly.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay. So I get the economics. Um, I get the lack of regard for human life that is part of it. What's being done to do something about that, either on the supply side or the demand side? Anything at all?
Well, that I think that's been the big struggle since this sort of whole war on drugs ignited, really. I mean, I think we can all look at the past 30 or so years that this has been happening and question the tactics, question the progress. It's not that, there are a lot of well-meaning individuals and officials that are trying to stop this, but if you actually look at the statistics, the cartels, they're not necessarily, coming illegally across the border to deliver drugs. These drugs are being delivered through the sort of the legal ports of entry. So, and they're getting sort of to every single state in the US, I believe there has been fentanyl found or cases of fentanyl overdose. So it is absolutely everywhere. And I think um, it is such a mammoth task. I don't think anybody really has quite the right answer of what can be done at this point because it is so essentially ingrained. And the cartels, they have networks in the United States. They have whether it's sort of local drug dealers, and it's sort of a very, very well-heeled operation. And those operations are just incredibly hard to dismantle. You have people in the right that want to see the cartels designated as terrorists, which would have both pros and cons. You'd certainly be able to go after the money a lot more and individuals in the US that were involved with them, but that also sort of blocks a lot of diplomatic channels and can create a lot of other problems as well. So it's a really hard one to balance. And I think that we're not seeing any progress on it. We haven't seen much progress really on the war on drugs for quite some time. And so it's just a matter of what risks I think Congress and the administration are willing to take to try to take a different tact.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I'm familiar with the the efforts of the right of aisle political system in the U.S. to go do something about it. And I'm also a little bit familiar with the fact that official, the neutral or operational part of the government has many programs that are designed to raise awareness of this problem, and with not a lot of effect because I don't know that the message is really getting through. But just to be complete, the from the official side of the political system, which is currently left as far as the White House and other parts of the political structure is concerned, what's the balance on the policy about this type of fentanyl in particular for that side, and how do you see the two sides cooperating, or the three parties cooperating to create something more effective, or is this another case of it's kind of just like stock?
When have we seen the parties lately cooperate on anything? I think this is part of our problem, is that we're so busy bickering, and trying to sort of stick to our political agendas and criticize the other side, regardless of what it is they say or do. That I think that we're looking at just a very broken political system and divisiveness, that I don't see much opportunity in working together. I would hope that there would be some representatives and senators from different states that may go forward with successful bipartisan bills, but overall, I think there's just a lot of finger pointing of what the other side is doing wrong, and there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of action to tackle it. The U.S. government has come out and said that both China and Mexico really need to do more. Both of those governments are pretty much denying their role in this crisis. Of course, China says it's not exporting the fentanyl, and that it's sort of own gangs and militias are not responsible for that, which of course isn't true because it can only come from one place, and that is that it is produced in China. And then, of course, Mexico, the government, the president there, Alamo's really basically come out saying that this is the US's problem. While he feels for the US, he's basically saying that, it's up to the US to fight the problem, and that they should be taking care of their youth. And so that is sort of his argument. And with that, and to a certain degree, the unpopular opinion is that the US does have to look inward too. I mean, it's very easy just to blame China and blame Mexico and blame the cartels, but we also need to look at the addiction problems that we have in this country. Where is this coming from? Who is it affecting, and why? And why are there so many people that are willing to take these risks? Because at this point, if you are taking pharmaceutical drugs or street drugs or whatever it is, that you're not sort of purchasing through a legal channel, you have to be aware that there is a chance that it's going to be laced with fentanyl to some degree. And so why is these sort of addiction rates continuing to go up? And that is something that I do think the US needs to address, and we need to look at every aspect of that, as to why it's happening, and also the healthcare industry and how challenging that is too. Because I mean, if you are suffering from an addiction, it's unless you have money for sort of premium insurance, which is very expensive, it's going to be hard to get the proper treatment that you may need to get through that addiction. And mind you, a lot of people I know who have died of fentanyl addiction, or suffer from various different addictions that may lead them into that path. Many of them, it often started out, maybe they received a sporting injury, maybe they hurt their knee playing hockey. They went to the doctor and they got opioids, and that really helped them for some time. And that was a point where doctors are really overprescribing these opioids. And then all of a sudden, there's a crackdown, and you can no longer access that medication anymore. So the best thing you can do is sort of turn to illegal pharmaceutical marketplaces or to street drugs to try to alleviate that pain. And the next thing you know, you're in a very deep addiction spiral where you are willing to dangle your life, because there really isn't a way out. So I do think that this is something that requires a multi-pronged approach and requires a lot of resources and attention, because it's killing a lot of youth, and sadly, the fentanyl marketing now is really targeting children as well. teenagers. You know, you've got rainbow fentanyl, fentanyl that resembles candy. So it's a really terrifying world out there, and I just think that we need to do as much as we can to kind of support people with addiction, as opposed to allowing stigmas to kind of get in the way, because that, you know, that's not going to serve them or serve us.
Yeah. Okay. I love asking you just the straight man question and then letting you just like go into all of the detail because it's kind of cool. Last question. Based on all of this and based on the clear lack of direction and cohesion by all the parties that should be taking an interest in this, do you think that we're no different from the cartels and not caring what happens to these 100,000 people a year to die?
I think, you know, obviously the cartels are business people. They're looking at the bottom line and the bottom line only. They don't care about human life. They're very much willing to let their own the people that are working in the labs that have to be around the fentanyl and the meth and that are breathing in these toxic fumes. Many of them die too. They don't have protective gear. So, you know, the cartels are not in it to care for anybody's well-being. They're in it to make money. And then the US, you know, I still think it's an incredibly, you know, brilliant country that I love to live in, but I think there's a lot more that we need to be doing to address youth and youth problems, and I do think that a lot of these addiction issues, you know, they happen in very rural areas, places that they don't make the news. I think that often we really focus on urban development and programs within cities and things, but we often forget about very neglected people in 200-person towns in the middle of Appalachia. So I think that there's a lot of different work that can be done, and a lot of people are willing to do the work. It's just a matter of how those resources can come together.
Okay. Well, yeah, unfortunately, I think the answer is right now, everybody universally doesn't care. And it's very, very sad. So, yeah, but keep track of this, Holly. This is an important thing because those 100,000 people do matter.
They do.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Dennis.